We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 19th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
I think that we had very good conversation with President Trump.
Very good.
And we spoke about very sensitive points. The first one is security guarantees.
But after what he describes as the best meeting he's had with Donald Trump, will Volodymyr Zelensky have enough support to save Ukraine? Also ahead in the next 60 minutes.
The allies we've mentioned, in fact, countries around the world, even China, have been giving the US the benefit of the doubt, and that's going to stop.
We ask what the world might look like in 10 years after America uses trade wars to realign the economic order. We'll find out how South Korea's latest military drills have rattled the North. And has anyone used skibbity or tradwife lately? Or are we all delulu in thinking that the latest entries to the Cambridge English Dictionary will actually stick around? That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Hungary's foreign minister has said it is unacceptable that Ukrainian attacks on Russian infrastructure have disrupted his country's oil supplies. Hamas has agreed to a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for the release of the remaining Israeli hostages in 2 stages. And Canada's opposition leader Pierre Poilievre is on course to make a return to Parliament by standing in a by-election. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio for more on these stories throughout the day. But first, for several hours yesterday, the world held its breath as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, flanked by a hastily assembled but deeply determined group of European leaders, held a meeting at the White House about the future of the Russia-Ukraine war. In the run-up to the conversation behind closed doors, it was apparent that Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky had a much more amicable conversation compared with their last bruising encounter in the Oval Office. But did any of yesterday's pageantry bring us any closer to the two aims of the meeting, namely to dissuade Mr. Trump from falling in too closely with Russia's president, and also ultimately to bring about an end to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Well, watching events closely last night was Jenny Mathers, who's senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University. She joins us from Wales now. Very good morning to you, Jenny.
Good morning.
Welcome back. This was an extraordinary day, and there were fascinating images of the leaders, the pageantry, the delegations, the map. Will it change anything?
Well, that's what we have to say, to see as things go forward. So what we can definitely say is that this was a much more positive meeting. I think everybody involved put in effort, especially Zelensky and the European leaders, who were very careful to flatter Trump, praise him, avoid any difficult mentions of issues that Trump didn't want to hear about, and basically manage him very carefully. So for those reasons, I think the optics and the general tone was very positive, for Zelensky. But actually what was agreed in concrete terms and what might happen next, that remains to be quite vague.
But is there anything that we do know? The one thing that was talked about quite a lot was this issue of a guarantee from the United States of some sort of security backup, and this real need to establish a new security architecture for Ukraine in the event of peace.
Well, this is the need that Ukraine has, absolutely, but it's not clear exactly what that's going to look like. So the most that Trump said is that the U.S. would be involved, that it would coordinate European efforts, that mainly the Europeans would be the ones in the forefront. And interestingly, Zelensky mentioned buying a large amount of American military equipment as part of this broader sort of security guarantee. And certainly in the past, Zelensky has said, the most important aspect of the security guarantee for Ukraine is going to be a strong Ukrainian military. So, in a sense, giving Trump, again, something that he wants, which is be able to say, oh, look, I've sold all this equipment to Ukraine, that's a short-term positive measure. But what exactly a new security architecture for Ukraine and for Europe would look like, we just don't know.
Indeed, because it's a really difficult compromise, or it's really hard to fudge this, isn't it? Because any security that is in any system that is installed needs to be robust enough to deter any further Russian land grabs. However, the big sticking point here is that Russia won't tolerate the presence of NATO troops in Ukraine.
Exactly. I think Russia has made it really clear that it doesn't find this acceptable. Now, does Russia have a veto over what NATO does? Well, that's for NATO to decide, how much power are they going to give Putin? But also it isn't entirely clear how much appetite there is among NATO member states for putting their troops kind of in the front lines in terms of standing between the Russians and the Ukrainians. I think that the Europeans are moving closer to that position, but I don't think they're there yet.
Tell us more about the way that the European leaders approach this. Each one seemed to have a different point to make, a different way of persuading Donald Trump. But one thing that came out clearly was that Emmanuel Macron, president of France, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, both wanted to talk about a ceasefire as the next step. Now, this is not what Donald Trump indeed or Vladimir Putin wants. How much was this an attempt yesterday by Europe to try and re-seize the initiative?
I think that was the case to a very large extent. I think there were really two big aims for the European leaders in terms of why they went to Washington. One was to stop Zelensky from being bullied and from having to stand alone, as he did back in February, against a potentially disastrous meeting with Trump and his administration. And in that sense, they were successful. They demonstrated a united front. But also it was trying to pull Trump back away from his adoption of basically Russian talking points and Russian positions after the meeting in Alaska, because Trump went into that summit with Putin saying, oh, there has to be a ceasefire. If Russia doesn't agree to a ceasefire immediately, there'll be terrible consequences for Russia. And then, of course, as soon as he met with Putin, he was all, smiles and talking about how there was no need for a ceasefire. Let's go straight to a peace treaty and no more talk about any sort of secondary sanctions or tariffs or anything of that nature. So I think the Europeans are really trying to pull Trump back more towards the position that they had got him to take out before the Alaska summit. And
do you think they succeeded because Trump called Putin, or a phone call was held between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump halfway through the meeting, and there is an intention, isn't there, that Donald Trump can get a trilateral meeting?
Well, that's what Donald Trump wants. It isn't at all clear whether that's what the Russians are going to agree to, at least not at the level of Putin attending. Were the Europeans successful? Well, it's a constant battle, I think, to keep Trump's mind focused on the issues that are important to the Europeans and the Ukrainians, because he has this tendency to snap back to his prior sort of default position, which is to be sympathetic towards Putin and towards Russia. So, it's a hard sell that the Europeans have, but they have to keep making that effort to try and keep Trump on the path they want him to follow. How is the Kremlin reacting to all this huge event yesterday? They must rather enjoy the way that everybody rushed pell-mell to Washington to try to manage Donald Trump, because at the end of the day, Vladimir Putin's in a good place. His army is making gains. There is very little reason for Russia to stop at the moment. Well, I think if Russia were to get the things that Putin is asking for, which is the sort of withdrawal by Ukraine from key areas of the Donbass, and various other points that Putin has demanded, I think if Putin were actually to get that, it would probably be worth his while to take that deal, have a pause, regroup, and then try again later, because it doesn't actually require him to concede anything apart from some sort of meaningless promises of he'll write something down on paper, which he can then ignore later. So I think it's possible that Putin might take such a deal, but it's not really something that he feels urgently that he needs to do. So in other words, if the deal falls through, he just carries on as he was before. And this sort of incremental gain in Ukraine, this sort of grinding away in the background, in some respects, that's quite good for Putin, because Russian society has sort of been lulled into this sense of, well, the war is inevitable, but it's kind of going on in the background. If Putin had to really ramp up efforts and announce a new mobilization, for example, that would probably spark a lot of important sort of outcry and resistance in Russia. But either taking a deal like this, which he could spin as a victory, or just carrying on as he has done, I think those things are both manageable for Putin in terms of his domestic audiences.
And finally, Jenny, as a lecturer and senior lecturer indeed in international politics, how many history chapters will be written about what happened yesterday?
Well, I think the whole of the Trump 2.0 administration is really giving us a lot more to think about in terms of the architecture, the fundamentals behind international politics, international security. What matters, what are the essential enduring issues, and what kinds of things can be changed. And certainly some of the things that we all thought were enduring matters that didn't need to be discussed anymore, like the direction of U.S. foreign policy and its relationship with its allies in Europe. All of these things are being thrown up in the air. So there's an awful lot still, I think, to come. We're only about 6 months into this administration. So yeah, it's definitely a turbulent time for those of us teaching international politics.
And indeed, are we any closer to peace following yesterday?
Well, that is the big question, and it just isn't clear. It isn't clear exactly what all of this is going to mean in the longer term. Will anything come out of it? So I wouldn't rush to say that we're on the verge of peace in Ukraine, no.
Jenny Mathers, Senior Lecturer in International Politics at Aberystwyth University. Thank you very much, as ever, for joining us on Monocle Radio. Now, in the 7 months since the US President Donald Trump was sworn in, so many norms have been cast aside. Ukraine, as we've just been hearing, is one of them, and trade is another. Unplugging the US from its central role guaranteeing the economic order of a globalised world and preferring a sort of protection racket waged with tariffs. Well, Adam Posen is president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and he's just written about this in the new issue of Foreign Affairs. Monocle's Andrew Muller spoke to Adam earlier and began by asking how post-American the world's new economy is going to be.
I think we're seeing the beginning, but it's been basically a one-way door, that there's been a fundamental shift in how people perceive the U.S. government, the reliability of treaties with the U.S. government, the safety of the U.S. dollar and dollar-denominated investments, and basically the need to self-insure that the U.S. is not providing the protections that other allies used to pay for, and that the U.S. is now more of a source of danger. So I think it's a very fundamental shift.
I mean, that question of insurance and how the United States' traditional partners and allies is a key theme of your piece. You say at one point that Trump's approach will do the greatest damage to those countries most closely tied to the U.S. economy. You mentioned Canada, Japan, Mexico, South Korea, the UK. Do those countries actually have other meaningful options, though, or are they so dug in to the relationship with the United States that that's going to be difficult?
They have very little in the way of complete outside options. And Andrew, I want to emphasize that list of countries is the countries that are both economically, but also security, geopolitically tied into the U.S. So there are other countries, including some small economies in Latin America, who are more dependent on the U.S. But it's about they don't have options. So maybe there are people in the Trump administration who explicitly or implicitly say, well, they have no choice. Let's just readjust. Let's just grab back more from them. But even then, this isn't like an arms control negotiation where you're just getting the other government to commit to something. This is millions of individual decision makers, businesses, households, investors. And so even if at a level of Prime Minister Starmer in the UK, for example, or Prime Minister Carney in Canada, or President Sheinbaum in Mexico, they have to kind of go along with the U.S. Doesn't mean they're going to deliver to the Trumpies what the Trumpies expect or want.
Well, I mean, it's one of I think the things that people have struggled to make sense of is why Trump is doing this in the world as it now is. I mean, he does keep hearkening back to these previous periods in U.S. history where perhaps the United States was more isolated, was more self-reliant, was more dependent on tariffs. But that's not the world we now live in. Is his project necessarily doomed to failure in that respect?
In essence, yes. Partly for the reasons you said, that the world has fundamentally changed. To get back to a world where the U.S., being very self-reliant and making huge use of tariffs as a source of revenue, you have to go back to pre-Civil War, so more than 160 years ago. And even then, the U.S. was dependent on outside markets, on outside capital, on outside education, outside technology. So there never really was such a period. There was a period briefly in the immediate aftermath of World War II where it wasn't because the U.S. was better off, it was because the rest of the world was so devastated. And the U.S. investing in rebuilding the rest of the world turned out to be a great investment for the U.S. as well as the rest of the world. So the project is ultimately fundamentally unsound. They can repackage it and say, well, this is really just a repricing, that we're not fundamentally changing the system, but that's not how it works. If you renege on previous deals in a very fundamental way and you up prices for what you're giving them enormously, people will respond. I think one point I make in the piece that's worth noting is Trump and his view, people who share his view, seem to think the U.S. has been getting ripped off constantly. And then there's a little bit of free riding here and there. That's inherent. But basically, it works the other way. The allies we've mentioned, in fact, countries around the world, even China, have been giving the U.S. the benefit of the doubt in various ways through many decades of different behavior. And that's going to stop. And again, that doesn't mean the U.S. is going to be imperiled, but we are going to be worse off.
Well, this is another point your piece does make, and as a spoiler for our listeners, it is quite short on good news. You do say that in the world Trump's program creates, everyone will suffer, not least the United States. Possibly because of that, maybe it would be tempting for some US allies to think we can wait this out. Domestic political pressure will return him to his senses, or at least some simulacrum of reality. But is it your view that it would be a mistake for those countries to sit around waiting for that to happen? Is this possibly just what the US is going to be like for the foreseeable future?
I fear it is. And even if it's not going to be this way for the foreseeable future, there's no percentage in U.S. allies in freer countries just sitting on their hands. There are things they can do, even if the world is worse than it was, to make the world better for them and their people. There are leadership activities that can be done in terms of working for Europe with not just UK, but with ASEAN, with Southeast Asian nations, with Japan, Korea, with Latin American nations. There can be maintenance of what's left of the trading system without the US to allow for more functional trade relationships, particularly with developing countries. There's fruit on the ground to be picked up, or low-hanging fruit to grab, whatever image you want for, and the UK is doing a lot of this, for US shutting itself off from talent around the world, whether in universities or entrepreneurs or migrants, that they can pick up and be an alternative. So there's a lot of places where other countries third nations that are not China and the US, can improve their own well-being in this world. But there's no point in just waiting for the US. If the US, it turns out, comes to its senses because, let's say, there's large inflation or a major recession or something, great, but no point in that. It's like Germany waking up to Russia. It's not it's not that the reality is it's worse to have a Russia you can't trust or buy off, and you hope someday there'll be a successor to Putin who's more reasonable, but you just have to work with the reality and adapt to it.
And that was Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He was talking to Andrew Muller, and you can find the new issue of Foreign Affairs magazine on newsstands. Still to come on Monocle Radio on The Globalist.
They are delulu with no salulu.
Why the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's choice of words is making it to the Cambridge English Dictionary. Stay tuned.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us. Whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Just gone 7:20 a.m. here in London. Let's continue now with today's newspapers. I'm delighted to say Theo Usherwood, political journalist and broadcaster, joins me in the studio. Good morning, Theo.
Very good morning.
How's your week been? Where's the work been happening this week? Or is everyone still sort of snoozing from the parliamentary recess?
It's gearing up a bit. I mean, obviously, what's the events in the White House last night and then Alaska at the end of last week has meant that for the British press pack, it's not been quite the clear run of a summer recess, and that sometimes happens every couple of years. It actually turns out to be quite busy. Last few years, it's actually been very busy because, of course, what happened last year with the Southport attacks. But the Prime Minister, you have to feel for him a little bit. He was in Scotland for his holiday on Saturday, and then that got interrupted with a call with Donald Trump and other European leaders, and then his Airbus had to come and collect him and whisk him over to the United States. So, yes, it obviously inevitably, because it's summer recess, like in large parts of Europe, it's a bit quieter, but it's not dead.
It's an interesting point you make, because not much coverage has been given in the last couple of months about the domestic implications of the foreign events that are going on at the moment, and one wonders from your point of view as sort of like pounding the Westminster beat. Emmanuel Macron, incredibly unpopular locally at home, yet is sitting shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump. Conjecture in Ukraine that Volodymyr Zelensky, brilliant on the world stage, and yet popularity is completely plummeting. Do we have the same situation here in the UK?
Yes, I mean, Keir Starmer has been net disapproval ratings have been the lowest of any prime minister on record. But he likes being on the world stage. He likes a little bit like with Tony Blair. He sees himself as a statesman. It is one of the jobs. It's actually, from what feedback we get from European counterparts, he's actually viewed highly by other European leaders, and he's managed to foster a decent relationship with Donald Trump, even if there are those who think he's been slightly obsequious with the US president. But he is in a much happier space in the US, in the US and other cities around the world on the world stage, compared to being when he's back at home. And indeed, it's had a knock-on impact, Emma, when you look at the rebellion that he faced on welfare cuts at the end of the summer term. From his own Labour MPs. One of the issues was that he didn't spot it. He didn't spot the trouble looming, and he didn't spot the issues. He didn't spot the issues coming down from his own MPs, because he wasn't spending enough time in Parliament.
Let's have a look at the papers. The Telegraph, in fact, widely reported, and we've mentioned it in the headlines, Gaza has accepted a new ceasefire plan. This involves a 60-day ceasefire, doesn't it, with the returning of the remaining living Israeli hostages currently being held in Gaza. It's not a new plan, is it? It's an American plan.
No, it originally came from the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who proposed this ceasefire deal. It has the support of Jordan and Egypt. There are around 50 remaining Israeli hostages, 20 of whom are believed to be still alive. There's a bit of a snagging point in that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government is saying that they think that they should all be released in one go rather than in stages over the course of the ceasefire. And from Netanyahu's point of view, he hasn't actually addressed this proposal, which Hamas is understood to have accepted and been keen on, simply saying that he thinks that Hamas is now feeling immense pressure. Meanwhile, we've got the Israeli cabinet due to meet later this week to approve plans for a full-scale military move by the Israeli Defence Force into Gaza. There's already been reports of Israeli tanks backed up by fighter jets moving into Gaza City, where you've got around 2.1 million displaced people currently residing. And from Netanyahu's point of view, he's not said whether he's minded to accept this plan, but simply that the understanding is, from what he said, is that actually the pressure of this military assault is, which he says is necessary in order to ensure that Hamas ceases to exist, is taking its toll and is bringing Hamas now to the negotiating table.
Let's move on to the story that is continuing, and we were mentioning this yesterday actually on the Globalist, the wildfires in Europe. 2 more people have died in wildfires in Spain, and the discussion that was being had around these same microphones was that the idea that climate change is never placed as the sort of the frame of the story. It is always, there are wildfires, oh, by the way, there's climate change. And the questions were being raised about whether the press should perhaps say another climate change incident where 2 people are killed in Spain. It's a difficult story to tell, isn't it?
It is, and I was just thinking back as I was looking at this story where it had been. I know it's obviously covered on Monocle, but I picked this story up off the BBC website, and it was right down and, squirreled away at the bottom of the page. It was not the main, when I spotted it at least, it was not the main story. And I compare that to a couple of years ago where I found myself covering the reaction to the wildfires in Greece, and we had tourists, British tourists included, fleeing Greece as a result of wildfires. And it seemed to be climate change, the climate emergency seemed to be that much higher up the agenda. But if you look at the temperatures that are being recorded, more than 45 degrees being recorded in Cadiz, and these fires are happening as a result of the extreme temperatures now being faced in southern Europe on an annual basis. This isn't just an extraordinary out-of-the-box heat wave. This is something that's happening regularly. But of course, with everything else that's happening in the world right now, whether it's events in the Middle East or what we've seen unfold in the US and in Alaska over the last 3 or 4 days, this story gets relatively minimal coverage.
Finally, let's move to a story which gets an awful lot of coverage here on Monocle Radio, not least on Monocle on Sunday, where we do love a goat story. We have extensively on Monocle Radio covered the issue of the goats of Al-Qudi, which have been wandering around, and I think the word marauding is often the adjective which is assigned to this story, or to the goats themselves. Al-Qudi tried to ship them off physically. Al-Qudi's dealing with its problem. We now have Stromboli, the island near the tip of the boot of Sicily, finding itself struck by the same problem. And these are beasts, aren't they?
They are. It's all getting out of hand on Stromboli. Now, of course, this is a volcanic island, and it's not a dormant volcano. It last erupted in 2019, but the residents are complaining that the threat from the volcano is nothing compared to the goats, I should say, that have taken charge. There's a quote here, a great quote here in the Times, from Federico Ascheri, I should say. A huge goat leading them stormed in, glowered at me, and when I tried to scare them off, and they charged, knocking me flying. The goats, his partner Samira Sully says, are getting so aggressive they've started fighting each other. Now, Ali Khoury back in has previously solved the problem by shipping off around 800 goats. It's just to the islands, just to the west of Stromboli, to the mainland, to goat farmers and the mainland. But the residents are saying that they're fearing that they're going to have to abandon the beautiful island of Stromboli unless somebody does something about the goats soon.
Actually, I think an even more devastating fate awaits the goats, because when we're talking about Al Khoury, when they tried to get the 800, they had to get them off the mountain and get them down to the port and onto a boat, and it didn't work because the goats were having none of it. So apparently, when the tourists leave Al Khoury next month, the hunters arrive. They're just going to shoot. Theo, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. That was Theo Asherwood. He is a political journalist and broadcaster and goat aficionado. You're listening to Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist. A quick look now at what else we're keeping an eye on today. Hungary's foreign minister has said it's unacceptable that Ukrainian attacks on Russian infrastructure have disrupted his country's oil supplies. Russian crude oil flows to Hungary and Slovakia via the Druzhba pipeline. They were stopped yesterday, with Budapest blaming a Ukrainian attack on a part of the network. Hamas has agreed to a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for the release of the remaining Israeli hostages in 2 stages. The latest proposal was mediated by Egypt and Qatar and is based on one originally put forward by the US earlier this year. Israel has yet to comment. And Canada's opposition leader Pierre Poilievre is on course to make a return to Parliament by standing in a by-election today. In April, he lost his seat when his Conservative Party was comprehensively beaten in a general election. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 15:31 in Seoul, 7:31 a.m. here in London. Now, recently, the messages coming out of South Korea towards the north have been mainly positive. The towers broadcasting pro-South Korean messages across the border have been dismantled. And last week, the new president, Lee Jae-myung, promised to try to restore a military agreement with the north aimed at reducing border tensions and to rebuild trust and to revive dialogue. Well, soft power efforts are in abundance, it seemed. This week, however, the hard power came out too, as South Korea and the United States began their annual large-scale joint military exercise. And I'm joined now on the line by Jayap S. Kwak, who's a regular Monocle contributor based in Seoul. A very good afternoon to you, Jayap.
Good morning to you.
So just explain to us the details of this exercise. It's the second this year, and it's the second of the 2 big annual exercises, isn't it?
That's correct. So it's called the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise, named after an ancient general that fought off a Chinese dynasty's forces, ironically enough. But it is as you said, it is an annual war game exercise, and probably the most important one of the year. Most of the exercise actually takes place in an underground bunker in a war game format, so which means that they're going through multiple scenarios of war in case of an invasion from North Korea. But for decades, Pyongyang has accused Seoul of rehearsing attacks on the North instead, and it's certainly a claim that both Seoul and Washington have rejected year after year. This year, as part of this de-escalation of tensions attempts from the new Lee Jae-myung administration, they have said that they're going to postpone half of the field exercises to next month. And of course, but unfortunately, that has not really invited much a positive response from Pyongyang. Today, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said that his country will need to rapidly expand nuclear armaments and called these military exercises an obvious expression of their will to provoke war.
And this is a problem, isn't it? Because the moment that Seoul tries to slightly de-escalate things, if you marry it with a very large scale military exercise, the communications between these two nations is obviously going to find itself in a perpetual state of tension.
That is unfortunately correct. And for most South Koreans, to be honest, on the ground, it's, we've seen this year after year. So for someone who's grown up in South Korea, this is no surprise to us. And it's always kind of hard to parse through these, saber-rattling rhetoric from the North, because sometimes they have followed up with some, nuclear tests or, to when it's the worst case scenario, or some kind of, small, small artillery attacks on the border. And sometimes it has been completely silent. It was just, all bluster. So it's really hard to predict what's going to come next. But what's for sure is that these kind of propaganda from North Korea is also very useful to solidify support from the North Korean public. It's Kim Jong-un regime is saying to the North Korean public, okay, again, South Korea and the U.S. are rehearsing for an invasion. So therefore, although you're going through hardships on a daily basis, we need to develop more nuclear weapons, develop more warships and more other kinds of missiles.
And what does this exercise or these regular exercises say about the relationship between South Korea and the United States?
The U.S. has, since the end of the World War II, the U.S. has been the guarantor of peace on this Korean peninsula, especially on the South Korean side. And it continues, 80 years on to be the number one ally in terms of security, especially with a rising China right next door. And of course, just, North Korea, 40 kilometers the inter-Korean border, just 40 kilometers north of Seoul. The U.S. Troops presence at about 28,000 soldiers has been the linchpin of South Korean security. And of course, I have to point out that Lee's hands are somewhat tied at the moment because there is a scheduled summit with President Trump next week. And the best that Lee can do at the moment is to maintain some stability until then. And Trump is expected to press Seoul for more funding for the U.S. troops on the peninsula and perhaps a bigger and clearer stance against China or China's more aggressive moves in the Northeast Asian region.
And from the point of view of South Koreans itself, how popular is the military at the moment? How much appetite is there among South Koreans to join the military, to protect the country?
As you can imagine, because most of South Korean military is through conscription, it's never, it's rarely popular anywhere, I would imagine, with the exception of some cases around the world. But for South Korea as well, the North Korean threat, the more propaganda we hear from Pyongyang saying, okay, they're going to strike Seoul with a nuclear weapon, of course, the most natural response is to increase support for South Korean military and more exercises and more U.S. troops presence. Just in case there is some kind of a war or some kind of provocation from Pyongyang.
Jae-up S. Kwak, regular Monocle contributor in Seoul, thank you for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, Now, the members club group Soho House took its name from the area in London where it first opened 3 decades ago. At that time, to have membership meant that you were probably part of the creative industry, and without a doubt, you were very fashionable and rather exclusive. Well, as the brand grew, it was listed on the New York Stock Exchange recently, and a rapid expansion increased a need for funds, while simultaneously somehow making things a little bit less exclusive. Well, Soho House has now been bought, and once again, the club falls into private hands. So what future lies ahead for Soho House, and indeed for private members clubs across the world? Well, joining me now is Charlie McGregor, who's the founder and CEO at hybrid hospitality chain The Social Hub, headquartered in Amsterdam, which is where he joins me now this morning. A very good morning to you, Charlie.
Good morning. Nice to be here. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And just let's turn our attentions to Soho House. Its story is one of being incredibly exclusive in London, and then it just grew too big, didn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if it grew too big, to be honest. I mean, I would like to think that it's maybe just one of the pitfalls of falling into the sort of IPO market and timing as well. You know, when we came out of COVID, they IPO'd and that whole market was changing as well. But indeed, what a journey. 1995 started off as a restaurant and now has 46 locations in nearly 20 countries, 18 countries, I think. So massive turnaround into a hotel/members club.
And as a result, it became, its popularity increased, its accessibility increased. But you mentioned the fact that when it was floated on the New York Stock Exchange, when there was an IPO, it didn't happen at the right time. So what went wrong for Soho House?
Yeah, for me, I mean, of course, I'm not into the details, but we have a similar company on a growth trajectory, the same as Soho. So I guess what I see is that 46 hotels is a lot of hotels. When they IPO'd, they were many less hotels, so they were on a path to profitability, onto growth. Of course, coming into after COVID, we had all the delays of COVID in the construction world. People weren't allowed to turn up for work, shortage of materials that led to delays in construction, which of course means increase in prices on construction price. So all hotels and all buildings were generally delayed and overrun in prices. Straight after COVID, we came into a high inflationary period, of course, fueled by heavy investments to counter the COVID period, but also the war in Ukraine and Europe didn't help at all. So again, another shortage of materials, another uncertainty. Interest rates went up, the exit valuations went up, which had an effect on the whole development model. And then of course at the same time you're trying to speed up and to open these hotels as quickly as possible, to get the top line revenue in, to get the management fees into your operation company, and really to fulfill that path to profitability. So a lot of headwinds, and if you look at the stock market, tech is booming, tech is scalable, is very quick. Building hotels and opening them is not quick. So it's for me, I got a bit of sympathy for the guys running the business. It's not been an easy run for them.
Indeed, there are an awful lot of external factors there. But as the founder and CEO of the Social Hub, what sort of lesson does everyone learn from Soho House?
What lesson to learn? Yeah, I mean, I think it's really key to make sure you have the right funding behind you. And at the right timing, I mean, there's a lot of luck involved in these things as well. But I think the pressure from the stock market to drive profitability, looking for quick returns, a bit more than long-term stability. So making sure that you've got the right investors and they believe in the plan. I can imagine, Soho, the investors in the IPO market would have been very happy for them to join some distribution channel from one of the big hotel chains, which would immediately increase, hotel demand and profitability of the business. But that's totally the wrong thing for Soho House. So I think it's really important to have the right partners behind you who believe in your purpose and your goal and your brand and stick to it.
And tell us a little bit more about how we think that Soho House itself will change now that it's fallen back into private hands. I mean, the original owners still have a share, but the fact that it is no longer going to be on the stock market, how does that reshape the long-term strategy for Soho House?
I think it's interesting who's the main partner. So MCR are the third largest hotel owner in the US, which says something. So they've got some very good brands. They've been winning awards from Marriott and Hilton for the operational skills of running those franchise hotels. So I think there's an operational mindset coming into Soho. There's going to be some expertise. There's economies of scale as well. I mean, Soho has 46 locations on 18 countries. If you think about that for a second, that's 18 different currencies, 18 different tax legislations, HR policies and everything else like that. So the economies of scale is a difficult one to get over, especially on a sort of an exclusive product such as Soho. So I think MCR can really bring some operational expertise and efficiencies to the group, and really allowing the group to get into to continue the growth. And I think it's, we sort of pigeonhole Soho as being super exclusive and things like that. And yes, it was definitely hard to get a membership because everybody wanted to be a creative, and that was the sort of core of the business. And it has relaxed the rules there. But I think, any 5-star hotel is per definition quite exclusive. You don't go and hang out in the lounge of a Four Seasons without being jumped on by the reception team there. So I think it's a 5-star product. It's a 5-star market. It's got a good community feeling, and that's certainly where I like it for. And that's the Social Hub is a community hotel as well. So you feel the community there, and it's got some great facilities. So.
Charlie, in less than 10, 15 seconds, if you wouldn't mind, because we run out of time, what is it that makes a good club?
Yeah, for me, it's a strong community. So if people know each other, if the staff know each other, and you walk in and people recognize you and say hello, then yeah, you're definitely onto a very good community-driven members club. So, Charlie
McGregor, founder and CEO at the Social Hub, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Amsterdam. You're listening to The Globalist.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's have an update on from the world of aviation, I should say. Sally Gethin is an aviation analyst, regular here on Monocle Radio. Very good morning to you, Sally.
Morning.
Let's bring ourselves up to date with the problems in Canada from the weekend, the stop-start of strikes and the clashes with the government.
Well, not just in Canada, it's fanning out across the world because, of course, Air Canada is one of the giants of North American air travel and actually operates around 700 flights daily to 180 destinations. And it's part of the Star Alliance. And really, what's happened in the last few days has just been an absolute meltdown in air travel between Canada and the rest of the world, really, and drawn in all sorts of other airlines and their passenger demographic as well, because it's not a clear-cut case. There's lots of sympathy amongst passengers for the concerns of flight attendants who are striking. So the flight attendants have been striking since August the 16th. And the really controversial aspect of this, the real standout fact, is that instead of letting it go towards negotiation and arbitration, the government exerted a heavy hand and enacted an obscure, a rule called S107, which means that it forced the hand of the flight attendants to go back to work. But they've defied it and even gone so far as to say they're prepared to go to jail if needs be, because they feel so strongly about their rights and their expectations being completely overruled.
How has things got this bad?
Yes, that's a really good question to ask, because it was in the pipeline for a long time. But I think the rather unsettling aspect to this is the CEO has kind of given the game away in the sense that it was relying on the support of the government to be able to resolve it. In other words, not an open negotiation or discussion with the unions. So obviously that puts the unions even more into antagonism, because they think, well, we were never even going to be listened to. So it's a bit of a standoff at the moment. And of course, it's all hands to the deck in terms of other airlines rescuing those passengers. I mean, they're stranded all around the world. And the reaction, also seeing it play out on social media, the platform X, for example, they're very angry, and they're not being rescued necessarily by other airlines. Air Canada said they'd get a full refund or rebooked, but there simply isn't the capacity available for that, because we still are at peak summer season.
And indeed, but we are seeing other airlines, in particular United, which is actually stepping in to help.
Yes, and of course, Air Canada being part of Star Alliance, that makes perfect sense. Yes, it is commendable that United Airlines is stepping in, but there is, like I said, only so much slack in the system for passengers that are caught out like this to be rebooked. And I think, going back to your earlier point, there is this element of surprise with this, and passengers were caught on the back foot, because it seems that they weren't updated necessarily about the situation, because of course the management thought that flight attendants would be forced back to work. But there was in the last 12 hours, there were talks still going on, which is a sliver of hope. And being that it is so drastic at the moment, that we hope that it really will, force some kind of resolution through in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Let's travel over to South Korea. The two largest carriers in the country have now agreed to merge.
Yes, well, it was greenlit by the Department for Justice in the United States, actually, in December. So this has been, building, gathering speed since then. Although originally this merger was expected to only take 2 years when it was first announced during the pandemic in 2020. But anyway, it is happening, and this could really propel Korean Air and Asiana Airlines into being one of the top airlines, especially in the Northeast region for Asia Pacific, but also, amongst the top 10 airlines as well in Asia Pacific, because it really sort of merges the two major airlines that are strongest in South Korea. They're already working out some benefits in terms of leveraging the combined strengths of the fleet, and for passengers, there will be some good news. For example, a major cabin retrofit program is taking place on 11 Boeing 777-300ERs, adding a premium economy cabin. So I think for passengers, for guests, this will hopefully offer some real passenger experience benefits that they wouldn't have otherwise had before the merger.
Finally, you mentioned the Boeing 777. Big developments there, and good news for Boeing at last.
Yeah, so it is in an upwards trajectory at last, having suffered so many setbacks, as we all know, in recent years. So the fifth B777-9, which is part of the much heralded B777X program, is on its way. It's taken to the airs. It's undertaken a test flight. Everything went smoothly. I watched the clip myself, and it was a joy to watch, actually. There's nothing more exciting in my book, being a bit of an av geek as well as an aviation analyst, to see a brand new airplane take to the skies in test flight mode like that. It just bristles with excitement, and it shows that finally we hope to see the B777X take to the commercial skies, not just test flights, next year.
Sally Gethin, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. You were The Globalist. Finally, on today's programme, new words to appear in this year's Cambridge English Dictionary include delulu, meaning delusional, tradwife, a term coined by conservative influences in the United States, and skibbity, which appears to be a word used by most children under 11 to mean very little indeed. The Cambridge English Dictionary bills itself as the world's most popular online dictionary for users of English. It says the new entrants must have staying power. But where will these words fit, and will they last? Well, I'm joined down the line now by Monocle's Georgina Godwin, mistress of words, currently at the Edinburgh Festival. Very good morning to you, Georgina.
Hi, honey. It's good to speak to you.
Are you tradwife, delulu or skibbity this morning?
Oh, definitely delulu. But here at the Edinburgh Festival, I've been here for the Literary Fest, and yesterday I heard Ali Smith speak, and she's got a new book called Glyph, Gliff, and she says that it could mean a momentary resemblance, a sudden or chance view, an inkling, a wink of sleep, a mood someone's partner gets in when they miss their partner too much and get upset about it, a post-ejaculatory sex act, an organisation that works for drug abuse prevention in Vienna, or to glimmer like sudden unanticipated light, or to dispel snow. So really, words are what you want them to mean.
Just remind us of that word, because it might come in handy.
Absolutely, glyph. But, she's not the only writer to do that. Shakespeare did it too. He invented or popularized hundreds of words like, say, eyeball, lonely, bedazzled, addiction, manager, swagger, eventful, belongings. Also phrases like brave new world, good riddance, green-eyed monster, wear your heart on your sleeve, the world's your oyster, and so on. And I think that when you look at that, when you look at the origin of language, a lot in English are colonial words, because English is a kind of alive romance and Germanic bastard language, really. It takes in everything. And Borges said at the end of his life that he only wanted to write in English because it's like a palette with so many colours. So if you look at those words that have come in, so for instance, from Indian, curry, bandana, guru, pashmina, juggernaut, thug, pajamas, veranda, pundit, and then you have Swahili, safari, Boma, Hakuna Matata, of course. But the thing about English is that we don't, France has the Academy, which polices language. Of course, they're terribly strict, as you know, being absolutely fluent in French as you are, Emma. But English is not highly policed. But here's the interesting thing. It used to be. So for centuries, the British upper classes spoke Latin. And then after the Norman conquest, they spoke French. So that only happened. They only began speaking English in the 15th century. But the RP of BBC English wasn't an entirely organic development. It was shaped by an advisory committee on spoken English. And that was set up by the BBC's first head, John Reith, in 1926. It was chaired by George Bernard Shaw. And they had a subcommittee on words which fiercely debated challenges to what for instance, the users of a television apparatus. So for TV, they wanted either aura looker, glancer, looker in, optoviewist, optovisor, seer, teleseer, teleserver, visionaire, and a late entrant was televiewer. It was chosen and ultimately shortened. And then they had some that were ultimately rooted out, not for TV, but for other words, like, for instance, for art historian, they had Kunstforscher from the German for art researcher. They wanted mindful to replace brainwave, inflex for inferiority complex, and so on. And so, I mean, there's so much that this whole concept of new words is absolutely not a novel thing for us.
It's absolutely not, but we have but 30 seconds to work out whether these words are going to stick.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think I'd like to propose a new one. I mean, I like to call you and I broadcast bitches, but I think we could come up with some different names. Broadlasses, sound dames, audio bells. I don't know. But frankly, to me, it's all delulu.
It is, and I'm still feeling a bit skibbity. Georgina, you've got 10 seconds to tell us what you're doing in Edinburgh this afternoon.
Actually, I'm getting on a train so I can present The Globalist tomorrow.
Excellent. Fine. Well, we shall look forward. I'll keep the seat warm for you. Georgina Godwin, arguably the George Bernard Shaw of Monocle Radio. Thank you so much for joining us on the line from Edinburgh. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to Hassan Anderson and Anita Riotta. Our researcher was Henry King. Our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.